Andrew Gillespie. Andrew is the Chair of Examiners for International A-Level Business. Please do say hello and tell us where you're from in the chat box. It's always good to hear from you. And if you have any questions for Andrew throughout the presentation, please put them in the Q&A box, which you can open by clicking on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. We'll have some time to answer your questions at the end of the presentation, and we'll also be asking you to answer some of our questions potentially throughout the presentation. So look out for those. Finally, the session will last about 1 hour in total, and we'll share the slides and the recording of this webinar with you afterwards. So don't worry if you miss anything. You will receive the presentation and slides after the webinar within 1 week of the session ending. So, as I mentioned, our presenter today is Andrew Gillespie. Andrew is the Chair of Examiners for International A-Level Business. Andrew has been a head of department and is an experienced teacher of business at GCSE and A-Level. He is the Chief Examiner for both AQA A-Level and Chair of GCSE Business, the lead developer for the UK A-Level specification, as well as the Oxford AQA International A-Level qualification. And Andrew has written many textbooks for GCSE and A-Level business studies and a book published on teaching business and economics specifically to international students. So without further ado, I will hand over to Andrew to begin the presentation.
Thank you very much for that. I'm going to say hello, and then I will switch off my camera so you can kind of concentrate on the slides. But thank you very much, everybody, for your time today. I know you're busy, and thank you for giving up some time to find out more about GCSE and A-Level business. So let me switch off my camera and we'll get started. So what we're going to do today is support you in your preparation for teaching. We're going to look at some of the specifications and the aspects of that. We're going to think a little bit about curriculum planning. We're going to point you in the direction of lots of the resources that exist to make sure that you know how and where that support is, and talk about some of the aspects in terms of teaching. So how do I organise my teaching time, but also what do I focus on? What are the skills that I need to develop? Where do I need to put the emphasis? How can I best support students as a teacher in the classroom and in terms of homework and things? So hopefully by the end of this session, you'll feel excited, reassured, inspired, and ready to start teaching GCSE or A-Level business. We're here all the time to support you. Oxford AQA very much wants to be with you as you make this kind of switch or movement. And so right the way through, if you've got questions at any point, do reach out and we will get back to you. In terms of the specifications, you're probably familiar with these. I'm sure you've kind of been working your way through these. But what we did when we wrote these specifications was try to ensure that we were producing something that was relevant. So the topic areas should feel engaging, fresh, and appropriate, so that when students are studying this subject, if they then look at the world around them and they are reading the news or talking to friends, family about business, the language we're using is appropriate and of its time. So, for example, in the GCSE, there is content in there about ethics, obviously a key area these days, globalization, environmental issues, so that we hope that by studying this, as well as developing really important skills, students are getting an insight into areas of business that are relevant to their future careers and to what they're seeing around them. The case studies, which we base things on, are deliberately avoiding being UK-centric. So, obviously a key difference of the international qualifications is that they are globally available, and therefore the context reflect that. So even as minor things as the kind of the currencies that we're using or the locations of settings, we think about carefully to get some breadth there and to make them accessible, and to make sure that we're not writing about something that would advantage some students from one region rather than another. So relevant, accessible materials that we hope will support engaging teaching. Skills-wise, we're going to talk a bit more about the skills, but an appeal of a business qualification is that it is developing a way of thinking. It's developing an ability to make judgments and recommendations. So really important skills, whatever students go on to do. And also thinking about the requirements that in any job that you're going to need. So GCSE, for example, we look a little bit at planning, what a plan, what the value of planning and what planning might consist of. Students don't have to produce an actual plan, but they'll be thinking about what business plans, and if they do go on to become entrepreneurs or are already, that will be very valuable. And at A level, by the end, if you look at the A2 papers, students are making decisions. They're almost management consultants making a kind of recommendation about whether to do something or not. So having studied business, particularly if they go all the way through, I think they'll be in a good place to deal with the world around them and their future careers. As you'll see, and we'll go through today, the way we've kind of chunked the specification is to make particular papers at GCSE and AS focus on particular aspects of the specification. So that enables students to prepare for Unit 1. Once that's done, they can then focus on different material for Unit 2, and that makes, again, just the whole thing a bit more accessible to them. That's true at GCSE and AS. There's also a qualification they can do, which is GCSE Plus, which is a project-based qualification alongside the GCSE, and that further develops really important skills of analysing a problem, making a recommendation, and thinking through how something would work. We'll talk about that at the end, but it's a very useful thing for students to do for themselves and for universities and employers. So that's a little bit more, so we'll come back to that at the end. But GCSE Plus is a research project where students identify a business problem, that if they're linking it to business, so they could work with a local business, and there could be something that the business wants to introduce, develop, or solve. They work with the business on what is this issue that we want to tackle. They then do research on it. They then analyze. They then come up with a proposal on how to solve it, or a recommendation, and they write that up. And part of the process is not just the end, what the end kind of submission, the end recommendation is. It's the process of reflection, analysing, thinking about how to approach a problem and how to apply that to business concepts. So a nice piece of work that, in terms of a student ownership of their own studies, producing something that's for themselves, that they know, once it's named, they will know more about than you, and they've pursued it to come to a conclusion for themselves. Resource-wise, again, we're going to touch on this as we go through, but in the resources section, there's a lot of information there that I strongly recommend you make use of, that whether that be guidance videos about how to approach the subject, obviously the specification, guidance on schemes of work, assessment materials. There's a wealth of resources in there, which we're going to talk about as we go through. But very, very much make sure you've explored that fully. One obviously is the specification, which is listed, you can see on this screen here. That is an absolute go-to. I mean, there are certain key documents in life. The specification is clearly one of them. The specification determines exactly what you're supposed to, or students are supposed to know and be able to do, and what they're not going to be asked to do. So you'll see in the specification sometimes it says, well, they won't be required to do this, or they won't need this, but they will need this. So, they might need an understanding of motivation at GCSE, but specific knowledge of theorists may not be required. So it'll specify exactly what's required and what's not required. So that's your checklist at all times. There will be all sorts of resources out there and all sorts of ideas. You may be coming from a different board. It's very easy to carry over something that you've done before, which may or may not be on this specification. It's very easy to approach something saying, well, that's how I teach it, and maybe miss a particular aspect that is on this specification. So I know it's obvious, but the starting point for you is always what the specification says. And that's true for us as examiners. So the examining process is quite a long and extended one in terms of from the initial idea for a paper to it actually being sat is over a year. It's a very long process with lots of stages to make sure that the quality is right and that it is accessible, that the paper's going to work, etc. And at each stage, we are mapping and checking against the specification. So where does this lie on the spec? Have we got the right sort of coverage? But it must always be linked to that specification. And therefore for you, that's your absolute go-to list of what's required for a topic. So specification is there always refer back to it. If you're teaching a topic area, make sure you've got that handy. It is accessible. I mean, I think students can access it as well. There's no reason why not, although sometimes people like to rewrite it a little bit for themselves and put it in a little bit more student-friendly language, but certainly that's the coverage that is required. Okay, we'll begin with GCSE and then we'll move on to the AS particularly. GCSE, as you know, I'm sure, is linear, so it's got 2 papers, and those papers are sat together either in May, June, or in November. Students can retake, they can't retake one unit, they have to retake the GCSE, but they can retake that as many times as they wish, and the highest mark or grade will count. The last point there about quality of written communication is often asked. There are no marks for language, punctuation, grammar, spelling. There are no marks available for that whatsoever. What we're interested in is what is the quality of the answer. Very much a positive approach. So when we're talking to examiners, what is there? Let's not focus on what isn't there. Let's not focus on what we could have written. Let's not focus on other things that could be there. What is there that we can reward? And we are looking to reward the skills and knowledge that students have demonstrated. Simple example, in a calculation question, they may not get the right answer, but the method is right. They will be rewarded for the method. They may not get the right answer, but they actually do understand the equation. It just hasn't been applied fully. They'll still get some marks. So we are looking to say, what do students know? What can they do? And reward that. And it's the same in terms of then of how they express their ideas. We look for the quality of their thinking and the quality of their arguments and seek to reward that. Now, clearly, if somebody writes a series of bullet points, that's probably not going to develop an argument. So in that sense, they do need to try to, for the higher tariff questions, to be developing what their argument is. And in the case of the very high tariff questions, weighing up, evaluating their arguments. So it's not about commas and spelling, but clearly that we do need to see the depth of argument and the depth of analysis and the depth of judgment for those very high tariff questions. That won't be achieved if it's just a series of one-word bullet points. So in that sense, it's not, as I say, spelling, punctuation, grammar, but they will want arguments to be extended, developed answers for the higher tariff. There is the specification. So if you're about to teach GCSE, I'm sure you're very comfortable with that. Things to notice. So there's a kind of backdrop for both papers, which is, well, what's business about? What's business involved? What are the different types of business? What sort of things influence business? So you'll see the business in the real world and influences on business is a theme that cuts across both papers. And that's topic areas, I say, like what form of businesses do you want? What are business objectives? How does the economy affect business? Those can cut across both papers. But paper 1 has a clear focus on operations and human resources. And paper 2 has a clear focus on marketing and finance. So that once I've done the operations and HR paper, I can forget those topics and I can focus for my revision on paper 2 to be marketing and finance. So in terms of kind of preparing for an exam, it just breaks it up a bit, which is useful to students. In terms of what they're being asked to do, you'll see the format is exactly the same. So that's great from a teaching perspective. If you're teaching a student what's required for paper 1 in terms of structure, technique, and so on, that's the same for paper 2. So they haven't got to get their heads around different ways and different styles of questions. Once they've understood paper 1, the format of paper 2 is familiar. The topic areas differ, the structure and format the same, the command words, the assessment objectives, etc., are the same. So that gives a certain degree of, again, reassurance, and from your point of view, you're preparing for one type of paper. You'll see they're equally weighted. you'll see that they are 90 marks for 2 hours. So that's pretty generous on time to give students time to absorb the material, reflect, plan their answers. So it's deliberately built in time for that thinking and reflection and to make sure they've understood the context fully. Another set of documents we'll pick up later is called the examiner's reports, which reflects on the paper and what's worked and what's not worked and what's been particularly strong in student answers, etc. You'll see there time after time planning, particularly for higher tariff questions. Have students thought about how they want to write that answer, or have they started writing? Planning is very useful, even if it's just sitting back a bit and thinking, how do I want to approach that question? And again, we've built in time for planning, so it shouldn't be a mad rush to get things finished. It should give you a little bit of time to say, right, I've read the question, here's the case study, how does that question relate to the case? Think before I write. Paper structure-wise, Section A, very kind of knowledge focused, mainly knowledge and explanation. What is this thing? So this gives us a spread of topics. So that's good. You get good coverage. You've taught things, they come up. Section A gives us a breadth of coverage, and then Section B relating to a case study, going from kind of short question to a big judgmental recommend type question on Section B and Section C, and that's true on both papers. Okay, now where are we? Weighting wise, so you can see they're out of 90 marks and they're 50%, so they're each paper is equally significant. So familiar structure, familiar format, same assessment objectives on each paper, same layout gives you a familiarity and enables students to know what they're kind of the format of the thing they're going to do. What are we assessing? Now, this is key for you. So if you are preparing to teach this, you know, I'm sure you are, but make sure you're totally comfortable with what these things mean. We are ultimately assessing a range of skills in certain proportions. And so when we assess a paper to decide if it's ready to be sat, we look at the wording, we look at the language, we look at the context, but we really also look at, is it on the specification, and we also look at, does it meet the assessment objectives? Have we got the right balance? And that means we are assessing knowledge, AO1, assessment objective 1. Do students know things? So if we asked a definition question, that's AO1. If it's a multiple choice, it's normally AO1. We're assessing whether students can use that knowledge in a business context, AO2. And that is fundamentally important, as I'm sure you know, to business. And if I was going to point out again from examiners' reports, where there needs to be more emphasis, it's on context, context, context. Now, if there's a load of numbers in a paper, and students are manipulating those numbers, they are immediately applying knowledge to those numbers and that business. They're doing AO2. If there is a question about any topic, whether it was delegation or central, it doesn't matter what it is. If the question refers to that business, ABC Limited, XYZ Limited, that answer has to be put in context. It's got to be used in relation to the situation of that business. And AO2 becomes incredibly important then to differentiate answers. And I would just stress that to you so that you can stress it to students. This subject is an applied using knowledge subject. And when you're studying something, they can learn the definitions, they can learn general points about franchising or whatever it is. But can they then use that in the context of the information they've been given? When you're setting work, try to make sure there's a context. When you're marking work, try to make sure you're pulling out the use of context.
EMV.
Try to avoid it being very theoretical or only theoretical. And I would try and do that from as early on as I can. It's easy, I think, to go, well, what I'll do is I'll teach the theory and then we'll start practicing applying it to case studies and items and so on. The problem with that is it's then seen as a very standalone skill at the end. And I think from the very beginning, you're saying, well, why does that matter in this situation? Why does it matter to this type of business? And that you build that in so it becomes part of the lifeblood of learning business is thinking about context. So AO2, we'll come back to that later, but really, really important. AO3 at GCSE is then developing the argument and making judgments. So it depends on the command word. If the command word is analyze, then all you have to do is analyze. You have to develop an argument. If the command word is evaluate or choose between or recommend, then you have to make a judgment on one compared to the other. So these are higher level skills. And again, important to develop. Left to themselves, students will often focus on AO1. When they revise, they want to revise AO1. What does this mean? What does this word mean? What does this term mean? That's fine, but those are low tariff questions. The big questions are, okay, analyze the effect, analyze how, analyze the impact, analyze, basically do something to develop an argument. And depth of argument is key rather than lots of points. If you find students for an analysis question with lots of different points, they're not going to hit the depth they need. If they're using the word kind of also, here's a point, also here's another point, also here's another point, also here's another point. If they're doing that all the time, they won't hit the depth that you require. We're interested in the quality of the argument more than the number of arguments. Okay, so your role is to support that extended reasoning. You're questioning in lessons. So why and why? So what and therefore what? To develop students' ability to produce a chain of reasoning, not just kind of one-off points. So don't kind of accept an answer that's, well, you know, put the price up and then what would happen? Or put the price up, why? Put the price up and therefore what? Use your questioning to challenge. Okay, and there's the format. So that's what we assess, and we produce a grid, and that's what we have to meet each year, is that basically in terms of the overall weightings of the assessment objectives, it's between 25 and 30% AO1, 35 to 40 AO2 and AO3. Okay, and you'll see there that's basically equal on each paper. So these papers replicate each other, but greater emphasis on AO2 and AO3. We've got to do something with our knowledge.
ठीक है, अब ये चैप्टर के बाकी क्वेश्चन कर रहे हैं, अब अगले पे आ जाओ, इन्वेस्टमेंट अप्रेजल.
So look at A-level. We'll just focus on AS for this session. There are other sessions where we can look at A2.
ये करने आपने कल आपकी छुट्टी है तो कल मैं परसों पूछूंगा.
GCSE and move up
Investment appraisal, payback period आता है.
Logical and flows very well. Or a student can start AS from scratch. There's not a problem with that. But there is a nice flow through if they want to carry on, and it will take them a bit further. So I might have studied motivation.
जैसे question है इसका payback period कितना
होगा? So there's a progression as you go through and as you move up towards A2. There's a nicely planned route there. But if I'm starting from scratch, no problem. This is modular, so there are units, and you can resit a unit without resitting the whole qualification. So there are 2 units for AS, and there are another 2 which you add on to get the A-level. So there's 4 units overall for the A-level. 2 units for AS, you can then get a grade, A to E. You can then add on another 2 units to get the A-level as a whole and get a grade from A star to E. Exams in January or May, June. And as it says there, you can resit a unit. So I could, for example, I'm not saying do this, but you could sit, unit 1 in January, and then if that needs to be retaken in May, June, you could do unit 2 and retake unit 1. The following January, if you needed to, a student could retake a unit 2 or retake a unit 1 then. So you've got the opportunity of resitting and do some strategic planning based on performance. And in each case, the best unit is taken forward. So, e.g., I could enter students for something in January, I could enter them for another unit in May, and some might resit the January if they needed to. I could then, in the second year, look at doing some more in January and some resits if required, and then finish the A-level the following June. So it gives you the ability to do some tailoring of who's entered for what if you can, if you've got that flexibility. And it enables students to kind of focus as they go and resit something if they have to.
4 years में आपको investment आपको
Again,
cover हो
same thing on quality of
uneven
communication.
cash होता है फिर उसमें
Quality
क्या
of argument is what we're interested
उसमें ये
in.
देखते हैं
We
आपकी
won't
1900
give
की
marks
इन्वेस्टमेंट है
for
पहले साल
full
300 मिल
stops.
गया बाकी कितना रह गया 1600
Similar
अगले
approach
साल फिर 500 मिल गया
to the
फिर कितना रह गया
GCSE. So we've
1100
obviously got a common theme
1100
here.
में से फिर आपको
So
600 मिल गया
we've
बाकी कितना रह
split
गया
the
500
specification
तो
into
आपको इस
parts.
साल चौथे साल में
Each
payback period
unit
मिलेगा
is exactly the same in terms
तो
of
चौथे साल
structure.
को फिर आप फार्मूला लगाओगे कौन
Each
सा वाला
unit is
कि
the same in terms of
हमें जितना
weighting.
चाहिए
Each unit is the
500
same in
चाहिए
terms of
रिसीव
command
कितना हो रहा
words, etc., etc. So once
800
students are familiar with Unit 1,
500 डिवाइड
they
बाय
know
18
what the
into 12
structure of a
प्लस
Unit
3
2 is
years
as well.
तो मंथ्स में
Okay.
आ जाएगा आपने उसको मंथ्स में निकालना है
Again,
तो
we've
payback
got
period आ
80
जाएगा
marks here and an hour and a half. So again, fairly
समझ आया
generous on time.
बताया क्यों
At
नहीं यार
AS, we
1900
don't have
देखो ना
case
1900 में से
studies.
300 आपको रिकवर हो
So
गया
it's
बाकी कितनी
very
इन्वेस्टमेंट रहेगी
short
आप
questions. There really isn't a lot of reading to
मतलब
do.
ये आउटफ्लो है
And
ये
that's
इनफ्लो
why
है
it's an hour and a half rather than say an
ये
hour
आप पैसा
45.
लगा रहे हो ये
Still
5
very
साल की
generous on
प्रोजेक्ट चलेगा
time
5 साल में
because
आपको
there's
ये
not
पैसा
lots
देगा
of chunks of text to read.
पहले साल में 300 दिया
तो बाकी
80
इन्वेस्टमेंट कितनी
marks an
बच
hour and
गई
30,
1600
half.
ये
These are
पेबैक
equal
पीरियड का मतलब
weightings
आपकी
in terms
इन्वेस्टमेंट
of the
कितने से
AS.
आपको रिकवर हो
Where do they differ? They differ in
1600 में
terms
फिर
of
आपको 500 और मिल गया
Unit
बाकी कितना
1
रह गया
focuses mainly on marketing, and Unit 2 is
1100
the other
फिर 600 मिल
functions.
गया
So we
बाकी
just
कितना रह गया
divided it up slightly differently. But again,
इस साल
you
आपका
can
पेबैक
prepare for
पीरियड
Unit
कंप्लीट हो रहा
1,
है चौथे साल में
forget
That's
those
right,
topic
total
areas
करो
and
तो
focus
फिर
on
तो 3
the
ईयर
topic
प्लस
areas for Unit 2.
कितना में
That
चाहिए
helps
500
with
चाहिए
revision and
रिसीव
so
कितना
on.
हो रहा है
Structure of the
8
paper,
यार ये
section
महीनों में
A,
आ जाएगा
just like
3 year
GCSE,
this month is the
multiple choice and
payback period
short answers. That's very good for knowledge. It mops up a lot of those. It gives
ठीक
you
है
coverage. Section B
इसके बाद से आप
is
चौथे साल
3
पे जाओगे तो
analysis
आपको पैसे
questions,
ज्यादा मिल रहे
9
हैं आप
marks
पेबैक
each,
पीरियड का मतलब
3
होता है
times 9,
एग्जैक्ट
27.
आपको इन्वेस्टमेंट कितने टाइम में
Section
मिलेगी
C, 3 evaluative
एग्जैक्ट
questions,
आपको
3
1900
times
कितने डॉलर में
12,
मिलेगा
36.
तो
So
आपने
an
चौथे
AS
साल में
paper
फिर
is
मंथ्स में कन्वर्ट
multiple
करना है
choice and
उसको
short answers, 3 analysis
तो
questions,
मंथ्स में कैसे
3
कन्वर्ट
evaluative
करेंगे जितने
questions.
हमें अपनी इन्वेस्टमेंट पूरी
Very
करने के लिए
clear
पैसे चाहिए
structure.
उसको ऊपर रखोगे
Command
और
words
जितने
again,
एडिशनल
as
मिल
with
रहे हैं
GCSE, very
टोटल
clear.
वो कहाँ
It says
रखेंगे
analyze, you
नीचे
analyze.
रखेंगे
If it
800
says assess or evaluate,
और
you
इनटू
evaluate. And you'll see when
12
we look at the
साल में कितने
questions,
महीने होते हैं 12
it's
महीने
very
होते हैं
clear to candidates.
तो वो महीनों में आ जाएगा
We've made a
ये
lot of
बनता है
effort here to make it
7.5
clear. This is what we
इसका
need
मतलब
you
आपका
to do
पेबैक पीरियड जो है
to
वो
give
है 3
students the
years
maximum
एट
opportunity
7.5
to show us
months
what they know and what their skills are.
ठीक है तो ये होता है पेबैक पीरियड का फार्मूला एक
Unit
होता
3
है
and
इवन
4,
कैश और
we
एक
won't
होता है
spend
अनइवन
much on
कैश
because I think most of you are probably at an earlier stage in this. But when you get to
एक
A2,
दूसरा मेथड
we
है
are now
एआर
kind of moving it up a level. A2 is more demanding than
ठीक है
AS,
ये प्रोजेक्ट
and
का
we're
एआर हम
becoming
निकालते
more
हैं एआर का क्या
integrated.
फार्मूला एवरेज
So what
प्रॉफिट
happens
डिवाइड
at
बाय इन्वेस्टमेंट
A2
इनटू
is actually it's the way we
100
assess now begins to vary from paper. So
अब
paper
एआरआर
3
कैसे निकलता है
is a
प्रोजेक्ट
fairly familiar case
प्रॉफिट कैसे
study
निकालते
paper.
हैं इनफ्लो
Paper
माइनस
4 is
जो
more
भी कैश फ्लो है
a
उसमें से क्या माइनस
report
करेंगे
writing.
इन्वेस्टमेंट डिवाइड
This
बाय
is where you're
लाइफ
the
ऑफ द
consultant saying, okay, I've
प्रोजेक्ट
analysed this
जैसे मैं इसकी
situation and
बात
I'm going
करूं
to tell
इसका
you what my
एआरआर कैसे
recommendations
निकलेगा
are. So it's a great finish to the course because you've
20%
moved from analysing topics to an
कितने
overall
पैसे मिल रहे
judgment
हैं
on
आपको
what a
पूरे
business should
प्रोजेक्ट के
do. And at A2, because
जीरो
it's
ईयर में होता है
A2,
आउटफ्लो
it's
नीचे
more
होता है इनफ्लो
integrated because you're now
मतलब ये
bringing
प्रोजेक्ट अगर
together
हम
topic
चलाएंगे तो
areas
1900 की
and trying
इन्वेस्टमेंट
to
है
see
5
what
साल
that
में ये पैसे मिलेंगे
means for a business in terms
व्हाट
of
इज द
its
टोटल
future
मनी दैट यू आर
strategy.
गेटिंग इन सबको ऐड
I
करोगे
won't go through all that, but you'll find that in the
उसमें से
specification. But
माइनस
what
करोगे
that
इन्वेस्टमेंट
table is trying to tell you
वो
is
हमारा क्या आ जाएगा प्रॉफिट
the
वो हमारा क्या आ
at
जाएगा
AS,
प्रॉफिट
each paper is equal
और ये कितने
weighting.
साल का प्रोजेक्ट
At
है
A2, each paper
उसको
is
फिर
equal
5 पे
weighting.
डिवाइड करेंगे
Overall, when you
answer
add
को
them
divide करके
together,
जी ये आपका निकलेगा
the
एवरेज
A2
प्रॉफिट
papers carry a bit more weight than the
और
AS
फिर
ones.
एआरआर का फार्मूला लगाएंगे
Okay, why? Because
अब ये
it's
करो बैठिए क्वेश्चन जी
reflecting
इसको
that an A level is
एक दो
building on
ट्राई
these
करो आप
higher
इसको
level skills.
मतलब अच्छे खासे
And
14
so
15
essentially
सवाल है
you're
जिसने किए
moving
उसको
up,
कोई
you've gone
भूले ना
from
ये
AS, you've moved to A2, which is more about the
एआरआर और
analysis of these
पेबैक
higher
दोनों को
level tariff
बहुत
ones,
कराते हैं
and they carry a little bit more weight to reflect the demands of A level. Assessment objectives,
मतलब किसी
similar,
तरह उसको
although
प्रोजेक्ट
we've
होगा
just split
एआरआर
out
निकालना है
analysis and evaluation.
एआरआर
So
का फार्मूला लिखो एवरेज
AO1,
प्रॉफिट डिवाइड बाय
knowledge and
इन्वेस्टमेंट
understanding.
इनटू 100
AO2, application. Keep remembering that when you set questions, when you're working in lessons, when
डिवाइड बाय
you're
इन्वेस्टमेंट
writing questions or homeworks, what's the
इनटू 100
context? How are they going to put this in context? Is it small business, big business? Is it growing? Is it shrinking? Is it a shop? Is it a car manufacturer? What is this? What am I going to do with this
अब एवरेज
knowledge that
प्रॉफिट
I've
क्या
got?
होता है
AO3, analyze, can I develop an argument? So I wouldn't teach this by rote, but, you know, and therefore, and as a result, and consequently, where's that chain of reasoning? Can I follow through your role, challenge with your questioning, extend that understanding? an AO4 is the highest order. Can I judge? Why is one better than another? And that really does need work. That's where you really kick in terms of what you can do. So you've told me that you want to do A, not B. Why is that? You've told me that C is better than D. Why is that? Can you justify that choice? And that's where things really matter. Okay. Sorry, questions coming about A2. So at A2, it is integrated. So at A2, it's covering much more of the strategic content. So it's different content from AS. And on both papers, you are assessing that content in different ways. At A2, it's more about the way you're being assessed rather than having separate topics for each paper. And that's because it's really getting to the stage where we're now looking at an integrated view of business and how these things link together more. Okay, and so if you look at the content, you'll see that AS is very much to do with what's happening within a business. So what's going on with marketing, what's going on with HR, what's going on with finance. AS is
divided by
functional areas very much. A2 then says, okay, now where's this business going to go? Should it grow? Should it go international? Should it start to expand rapidly or shrink? How is it going to manage that change? What's the culture of this business? Should we take over another business? What sort of cultural issues might we face then? So the A2 content is big picture stuff, and it's assessed through by the fourth paper on writing a report on
paper
the
3 में
next
भी आ
thing that a
सकता है,
business
4 में
should
भी
do.
आ सकता है.
Okay, if you've got any questions, I'll keep going, but just pop them into the question box and we'll answer as we go. Let's have a look at curriculum planning.
4 में कुछ भी आ सकता है.
This is really just obviously for you to look at how you're going to organize your time, and that'll vary for all of you depending on, are you doing an accelerated 1-year course? Have you got 2 years? How many hours do you have per week? Are you co-teaching? What's your academic year look like? Do you want to enter in May or November? There's a whole series of questions that only you can answer, I'm afraid.
ये देखो डिसीजन ट्री बनाओ. परसेंटेज लगाएं इसके साथ.
ये क्या परसेंटेज निकली है सर?
मतलब ये आपके प्रोजेक्ट का ARR है, एवरेज रेट ऑफ रिटर्न के. ये आपको प्रोजेक्ट 8% रिटर्न देता है. आप इसमें इन्वेस्टमेंट करते हो तो आपको 8% रिटर्न देता है. ठीक है.